Hi, everybody. Welcome to Copyright Killings. My name is David Diamond. I direct global marketing for Picturepark. I've been in the dam industry for over 15 years, authored Dam Survival Guide, and you can download a free copy of that at picturepark.com/freedambook. With us today, David Ricks, the owner of ControlledVocabulary.com, project manager for photometadata.org, a professional photographer, the chief technical advisor for the PLUS Coalition, and a pioneer of digital preservation award winner from Library of Congress. Welcome, David.
Welcome, Mike, or David.
All right, and you're joining us from.
I had my mute on.
You're joining us from Champaign, Illinois, in the United States tonight, right?
Correct.
All right. Also with us, Jeff Sedlick, who is the president and CEO of the PLUS Coalition. Jeff is the president of Jeff Sedlick Productions, and he's former president of Advertising Photographers of America, a professor at the Art Center College of Design, and an intellectual property consultant and expert witness who is joining us from Pasadena, California. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, and then moving all the way across to Vienna, Austria, Michael Steidl, who is the managing director for the IPTC, who's been with that organization for 10 years, 20 years as an IT consultant in the news industry, former reporter, journalist, and radio host. Guten Abend, Herr Steidl. Willkommen.
Hello, welcome.
All right. All right, we're going to get right into it. The agenda for today is we're going to talk about embedded metadata, what it is and why it is important. We're going to talk about social media, the role that it has with regard to metadata and copyright. And then we'll talk about orphan works, what the term means and why it matters. So let's get right into embedded metadata. David, tell us what it is and why we care about this.
Embedded metadata is something that's been around for quite a while, ever since JPEGs mostly have been around, but a lot of people will embed it into other types of files as well, and not just image files. But it's a quick and handy way to have some information about the actual image or other asset, contact information, copyright notices, rights information, as well as descriptive information about what's going on in the image, when it was taken, and lots of other stuff besides that that can be of very valuable use to people that want to use the image.
Okay, and so tell us, Michael, about there's an embedded metadata manifesto. What can you tell us about this?
Well, this is a document which was developed and agreed by the IPTC Photo Metadata Working Group 2 years ago in May 2011. And it has been published on its own website, embeddedmetadata.org. And there it is with 5 major items. And these items address different parties who are involved in metadata workflows. And I would like to mention these items and also who is addressed by them. So first item says metadata is essential to describe, identify, and track digital media, and they should be applied to all media items. That means that the owner and the creator of items have to take care that this happens. So they cannot expect that anybody else does it for them. So there are some technical metadata embedded by the camera, but any description, any rights-related metadata have to be added by the media asset owners. The second bullet says media file formats should provide the means to embed metadata. This is turning to the standard makers. As David just mentioned, there have been some old formats which from the start enabled to embed metadata, but there are still a few formats which still do not enable. So for instance, the GIF format has no metadata header. The third item says metadata fields should not be changed across metadata formats and including also metadata applications. This is taking action on the software makers. So they have to take care that, let's say, the creator field is named creator field in all applications and not having 5 different applications dealing with metadata and having 5 different labels for it.
Mm-hmm.
The 4th item says copyright management information must never be removed from the files. And the 5th says other metadata should not be removed without the agreement by the owner. And this turns to the software makers and to the owners and operational departments of either software or sharing systems. So, for instance, the social media systems. So this is what is said by this, and we are turning to different parties. And I should mention that this was not the initial manifesto. There already has been one in 2006, and this was created at this time by the SAA. And so what it needs to have such a manifesto is not only put it on a web page, but also bring it to the attentions from time to time.
Now, after the manifesto was published, and it was my understanding after this that you started doing some research into how embedded metadata was being used or what practices were being used. Let's bring David into the conversation. Tell us about that. How did that research begin, and what were your findings there?
Well, basically that was the original metadata manifesto that I was a co-author on, that was done in 2006, and at the time we were primarily interested in how stock images that are on stock distributor websites, whether or not those were being distributed with some basic metadata in them so that people would be able to find the original, where it came from. What we were finding is, in a lot of cases, the way that graphic designers and other people work is they'll see something, they'll right-click and download it to their local hard drive, they'll throw it into a comp, they'll get everything approved by the people, and then they have to find the image. And we had discovered through conversations with a number of people that this sometimes became a problem. If there was a visible watermark, okay, great, they might know that it came from Getty, but if they had changed the file name, then all of a sudden even just finding that within the millions of images on Getty Images could be a problem. So some of the stock distributors do actually put embedded metadata in, some did not. Some, there were some strange things that were happening where the watermarked images didn't have any embedded metadata, but if you logged into the site and got an unwatermarked one, that would have embedded metadata. And we did a very rigorous testing of all the major distributors at the time and found that a good portion of them were not embedding any information, which, since we were representing stock photographers, they were concerned about that, because that meant that somebody might download an image and then not know where it came from and then not end up licensing it. But during part of that and some other presentations I had given, we discovered some of the images from Corbis were ending up on Flickr, and because the Corbis images always did have embedded metadata, the copyright notice for the images would show up on Flickr, but it wasn't under the name of the person that was uploading it. And so it's kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. But then, when we went and looked in the actual files, many of them didn't have it in it, but it was still showing up on the site. And that was kind of curious, so we started looking into the social media end of things, and I've continued that on as kind of a personal project along with some of the members of the Controlled Vocabulary Forum since about 2009, and have done that for, I think there's like 50 or 60 different social media networks and photo sharing sites that we've done little surveys on to see, what type of metadata they retain, if they're removing any of it, if they're changing the file name, and lots of other things.
Okay, so let's ask Jeff. Since David has brought up social media, and this is such an important topic for us now, how much of a concern is it with regard to all this?
Well, social media is just part of the natural evolution of human communications, and it's something that's not going to go away. It's something that's going to continue to expand, and the concern is, it's used to communicate, and part of communication is sharing. And when you have the sharing, and when that conflicts with the rights of others on occasion, that's where you have the area of concern that is a growing concern. You know, and a big part of that concern is the fact that most social media sites will strip out the rights information and all other descriptive information from images that are posted to those sites and shared. You have both private usage on social media, and you also, of course, have commercialization of social media, you know, company sites, etc., and images being shared across all of these sites, sometimes with permission, sometimes without permission. A good percentage of the images that are posted to social media sites are posted you know, by the owners of the media that they're posting, whether that's images or otherwise. Those people may or may not be aware of the underlying terms and conditions that are applying to that upload of that image to that site, and how it can be shared, how it can be offered for downloading, for example, how it can then be used by other participants, whether on or off of the social media site. You know, that is one big concern, is when images are then taken off of social media sites and moved outside of those sites, either by screen capture or download, and stripped of their identifying information and then used for various commercial and non-commercial purposes without the knowledge or permission of the copyright owner. Mm-hmm. and that can become a significant concern, and it is a growing concern. I know that the rights holder groups are in discussions with the operators of the various social media sites, and people are searching for a solution that will be fair to the users of social media as well as fair to the owners of the content that is posted to social media.
Mm-hmm. But was it, I mean, before we had social media, we had the issue where a photograph would be printed out and it would be used and passed around and given for use in some print ad, and presumably we had no embedded metadata at those times as well. So is this sort of just an exacerbation of that problem, or is this a completely different problem?
You know, previously when you printed something out, perhaps it would have the name of the photographer on it somewhere, a photo credit of some kind, and also we're talking about very low volume usage typically, whereas on the web you're talking about millions or hundreds of millions of potential users of each image, or even more than that number, and it's just when you scale it up, it becomes an out-of-control situation. It's something that we're all going to have to live with and adapt to, and I think that by you know, using current technologies, by the creators taking certain steps to make sure that they can be identified, and by working with the social media operators, that we can arrive at some sort of solution that's fair to all.
Okay, that makes sense. So, Michael, recently the IPTC issued a press release that announced the results it had from doing a social media metadata test. I mean, for me, this was quite a surprise. I didn't realize that something like this was going on, and the results themselves were amazing to me. What can you tell us about the test? Why you got into it, and tell us a little bit about what you found.
Yeah, well, the IPTC is the standardization organization behind the photo metadata, which are widely used, and we are not only taking care for the creation of standards, but also for the practical use of them. And so we did already a survey about the use by professional photo libraries, photo agencies in 2010, so what fields are used, which software is used, and as Jeff just mentioned, social media get more and more important as a marketplace for sharing photos. And so we said, okay, we are testing professional software. Let's also test such a social network system. And so we started doing this. And maybe before going to the results, I should give a quick overview about our test procedure. So we took an image with embedded metadata, and the metadata were in all three technical headers which are made for it. There is one called the EXIF header, the other one is the IPTC IRM header, and the XMP metadata header. Mm-hmm. So they all were filled. Then we uploaded this image to a social network system, and then we had a look at the user interface. Are some of the metadata displayed there somewhere? And if are they displayed correctly? So if there is a field for the creator, is it really labeled creator, or is it called the owner of the image or something like that? Okay, and then finally we tested how to get this image down from this social network system on my local computer. And there are two options for that, either doing it, if it is possible and supported, by the save image, save as item from a browser. Or the second one is that already some systems have in their menu of the user interface a download function. So that you can, by this means, download the picture. Okay, so that were the prerequisites and the test procedure. And then we started to test 15 systems, larger ones, smaller ones. The only requirement was it must support sharing photos. Okay, so then we tested them, and the results are, first we checked the display. Only a few of them display metadata at all, embedded metadata at all. So the few which showed them correctly. But from these 15 systems, only displayed the 4 C's, as we call them. So that are the fields caption, creator, credit line, and copyright notice, which are relevant for claiming copyright and giving information who's the owner of this photo. So only 2 of the 15 providers showed all 4 fields, and 3 showed a part of them. And then we went to the download testing, and the save as function of the browser was supported correctly by 7 systems of 13 systems. 2 systems disabled this function in the browser. Then 6 systems support a download function in the user interface, and from these 6 systems, 4 downloaded an image with metadata. So the total was, now combining some support save as, some support only download, some support both. So from the 14 systems from which you can download a photo, 4 of them stripped off metadata of all kind of download procedure. So this doesn't sound a lot, but on the other hand, if I read out the names now, you see why we were a bit alarmed. So those who did not support metadata are Facebook, Flickr, they are the free account of Flickr, Pictify, and Twitter. So I would say big parties in the social network game, and we can only say, well, apparently it's not that hard to support metadata not to be stripped off, because 10 out of the 14 tested systems were able to support it.
Was there any particular network that you thought did an excellent job of handling this?
Yeah, well, for instance, there are Dropbox, Google, Imagely, and Jumio, which supported always to get, if you are able to download an image, in any case it had metadata.
Right.
Some of them only had it with the download function, but not with the save as function. But again, Dropbox, Google+, Imagely, and Jumio were able to deliver metadata in any case, and Tumblr, sorry.
Okay, so you presumably then, when you found the results, particularly for the networks that were in more violation of messing with this embedded metadata, did you contact them? And if you did, what was the response?
Yes, we tried to contact them. First, it is interesting how hard it is to get in touch with somebody else than a completely generic info at email address, or getting a telephone number, something like that. So we tried to find the right persons, and then we sent emails and printed letters to them. Yeah, and unfortunately we did not get a single reply.
Really? Not from a single network, no reply?
No reply from anybody.
Okay, and that's...
Apparently metadata are not important to anybody.
Or they don't know how to read printed mail. That might be something that arrives and confuses them. But okay, so let's move on. Why this is the big question here. Why do you think the metadata go missing? I mean, what's happening here?
Well, I think there are two reasons for that. I would say the smaller systems, and we have been talking to other smaller systems. Some have been turning to us after that. So they were not exactly aware of what's happening inside their software. So they buy or organize some software libraries, and then somebody writes a user interface and says, you have to scale down a photo, and they don't care about if in the scaling down process the metadata are stripped out. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the successes of making these results public is that primarily beginners are having an eye on this now. So I would say there are some parties which inadvertently strip off the metadata. And there are other parties which apparently don't take care about, because if you have a large organizations with hundreds of engineers in it, I think there is not a way that not a single of them would be aware, okay, we are handling photos and the photos have metadata and we should care about it. And I would say not only put the burden on the engineers, I think there are also product managers, as metadata are also relating to rights. There is also an issue. If you strip out rights-related metadata, yeah, maybe you're killing the copyright.
Right. So, what Jeff, David, what do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. Go ahead, Jeff. Well, I was going to add in, I just actually in the last couple of months I've been in touch with a couple of different developers that are, I mean, they're a bit beyond what I'd call a startup, but you know, one of them was brought to the attention by another person in the Controlled Vocabulary Forum, and they put me in touch with them, and I did a little test and found out, well, you know, this is stripping metadata, and you know, the engineer did actually write back, you know, actually very promptly. I'll give them credit for that, and said, no, it's in here. And I'm like, are you looking at the image that's on the web? Because here's a link to it, and here's, you know, an online test of it, and it's showing nothing. And you know, came out from our discussion, oh, they were looking at the image on their server before it was processed. And it's like, okay, yeah, the original image has that, but that's not what everybody sees. And then it kind of dawned on them, and we went around, and you know, I had to find out a little bit more about, they happen to be on a Microsoft server, and so the solutions I was most familiar with are for more Unix systems. But we were able to find a solution, and they implemented it, and within a day everything was working. There have been others where you know, even after we've contacted them, there was an exchange recently with another one where I'd posted an image through their iOS app to their service, and you know, noted in a comment on it that all of the information was stripped. And you know, after an exchange, it turned out it was one of the engineers that I was talking with, and his comment was something along the lines of, oh, we didn't realize that was important. We'll take a look at that for, you know, the next rev of the application.
Right.
So it's kind of like, wow, they never even thought of it.
And then you have, this is Jeff, and then you have the situations in which metadata is stripped so that you can speed up page loads, and this mostly occurs with the search engines who make their money by exposing ads. That's how search engines operate. They expose ads to the public. People click on the ads, and the search engines are paid for that. That's why some of these search engines or most of the search engines are free for us to use. Mm-hmm. But somebody's paying for it, and that's advertising, and that's how the search engines make their money. So in order to speed up page loads, they strip all what they deem non-essential metadata from the images, which is pretty much all metadata. And and you know, there is a cost to having metadata in that file, because you know, even a small amount of data added to the file, when you multiply it by the number of images that are being loaded on a page, that's going to slow down the loading of the page, and thus slow down the revenue generation for the search engines. And I think that's what we're seeing as well.
So just to make this point, because I think it's important that we make it, we're not assuming that there's any evil conspiracy at work here to strip copyright away from copyright holders. Would you all agree with this?
I don't see any conspiracy. You know, certainly some people intentionally infringe, but I don't think that the search engines are stripping metadata in order to infringe or support infringement. You know, there are laws in place that first anti-circumvention measures can't be defeated by the removal of metadata, or you've infringed. But you have to have the intent to infringe or to support infringement when you're doing that in order for it to be illegal. And I really don't think the search engines are doing it for that purpose. I think they're doing it to make money from page loads.
I see. Okay.
Now when you're saying search engines there, Jeff, are you talking about the social media services as well?
I haven't included them in this. I think the social media services are doing it just because that's how they started, and I think they need to get up on the bandwagon and include that information.
Yeah, because I was going to bring up, I mean, I had brought this up with Flickr, you know, and you could actually see there were a number of threads on their user comment boards and things like that dating back to even 2007, 2008, where people were noting this and asking, you know, why isn't this done? And actually for a while there it was working, and then one of the, you know, Flickr engineers came on and said, oh, that was a mistake. And then he turned it off again. So it's like, okay, so you actually, you know, there is a way to do it. You're just choosing not to for some reason. Yeah, and one thing Michael had mentioned also, the tests that we had done with Flickr were on the free accounts. The paid accounts actually do retain the metadata in the original image. In other words, the largest file size that you upload, but because of the way Flickr works, it makes smaller versions of the image for other people to see, and none of those have any information in them whatsoever.
Okay, so you've got all of this information is we assume is put in by the content owner or creator, and this is a whole different.
That's an
webinar.
assumption.
Yeah, that's a completely different webinar. And then it goes up online, and this stuff gets stripped out. So tell us, David, what an orphan work is.
Well, I mean, in its simplest sense, an orphan work is a copyrighted work, or something that's presumed to be copyrighted, for which the owner cannot be identified and contacted. So, you know, in the instance, let's say, you know, if I uploaded something to my Flickr account, if somebody, even if I had a pro account, if somebody downloaded the next largest version to the original and saved that to their desktop, that's not going to have any information in it. So if they come back 6 months later, or if they're at a company and they leave and their computer gets handed over to somebody else with this, you know, hard drive full of images, how do, you know, what's that person to assume? Do I have the right to use this? There, you know, there's no information in it. I don't know who it belongs to. What do I do?
So let's bring Jeff back into the conversation. Why are orphan works such a concern now?
Well, to add to what David just said, you can also have an orphan work when there's a name right on the work or in the work, in the metadata, and you can't contact the copyright holder, or you try and there's no response. That work could be deemed an orphan as well, even if that person is known. That person could have passed away.
Or they could be working for one of the major social media systems that donates their email.
Exactly. You know, so I'll get into why orphan works are a concern. I need to say that, you know, in my work for the PLUS Coalition, we are a neutral body. We are a coalition of all sides of the equation: the creators of images, the users of images, distributors, publishers, etc. So we don't really take a position on orphan works, but I'm glad to describe it. In orphan works, you essentially have two groups. You have the people who want to use images, and you have the people who own those images. And you know, among the ones that use them, or let's say make their living, or have a mission to preserve or study or exploit, and I don't use exploit in a bad sense, just use, you know, making use of works that are owned by others, whether that's for cultural heritage purposes or commercial gain. This could be museums or libraries, researchers, educators, and then on the commercial side, advertisers, publishers, corporate users. You know, you can also have documentary filmmakers. These are people who want and legitimately need access to works, and especially on the cultural heritage side, you know, the core purpose of copyright law is to benefit society, and it's very important for them to be able to preserve our history, our culture, you know, no matter what country you're in. And they're having trouble with that because for works that they can't identify the author or can't contact the author, there's a lot of liability involved in moving forward to, let's say, duplicate those works for preservation or show those works you know, in a show or put them up on their website. And these cultural heritage institutions are risk averse. I mean, they don't want to take a risk. They could be sued if the copyright owner or their family comes forward. After all, copyright law can last long after an author passes away. Mm-hmm. And so there's a legitimate concern, and what they desired to do was to figure out a way that orphan works could be used. And you know, on the other side, you have those who earn their living by investing their skill, their time, their effort, and their funds in the creation of works, and or those who acquire legally the copyright ownership. These are the you know, we're talking here about photographs. You know, you have the photographers, illustrators, and other visual artists, and people need to realize that professional artists are not in the business of selling their art. They're actually in the business of selling the right to make use of their art. So anything that allows people to make use of the artwork without permission or license from the owner is a concern for these professional artists, because they feed their families with the funds that come from granting permission to make use of their work.
Right.
And one of the core challenges of the orphan works exemptions is that an orphan work can be a work created in the 1800s, or it can be a work that was created this morning. There's no distinction between historical works and modern works. Any work, whenever or wherever it was created, can be used. And the real challenge here is that a creator can add metadata to a file. They can put their name on the file, you know, on the front of the image. They can insist upon a credit. They can carefully name their digital file. They can make the terms very clear in the contracts and the license agreements that they provide to their clients. But once an image leaves that creator's hands, it's out of their control, and despite their best efforts, can be instantly orphaned by somebody either stripping that metadata, taking a screenshot of it and posting it somewhere, mm-hmm. Renaming it and not putting a credit on it. It's an instant orphan, despite the best efforts of the rights holder. And as a result, we have the fact that preservation of metadata is kind of a rare exception and is not the rule. And it's not within the control of the creator or copyright owner. Even, you know, of course, creator and copyright owner have a professional responsibility to attempt to identify their works when they're pushing them out. They don't have a legal responsibility to do so, but they do have a professional responsibility to do so. And so we see this legislation come up. And that legislation has some issues. It requires, you know, wherever this legislation is in several countries, it requires a diligent search, but there really is no way to define what is or is not a diligent search, and ultimately that will be left up to the courts. The reality is that it's very easy not to find someone when you don't want to find them. Okay? Right. And so, you know, if you do want to find them legitimately, there are going to be resources in which you can find them. There's also issues of no injunctive relief. In other words, the inability to stop somebody from using an orphan work once you discover it. That use can be objectionable. It can be used to support a political view or a cause, or to support a product or company. It could be being used by a competitor, you know, to create a poster that they're selling in competition with the photographer who's also offering a poster. It can be included in a new work that is then owned by the user who used the included work without the permission of the author. And so we have a number of solutions being put forward, like the public posting of databases of orphan works. Of course, people will just go there to find works that are probably orphaned in order to be able to use them. And then the posting of an intent to make use of an orphan work, also a bad idea, because how, you know, if such intention databases would have millions of entries, perhaps thousands of entries per day, tens of thousands, what sole proprietor photographer with no employees is going to have time to go monitor every day tens of thousands of inputs of something that might say, I'm going to use a picture of an aspen tree in my magazine. I don't know who used it. I'm posting it here. You know, what photographer could possibly monitor that? You also have issues of rights of privacy and right of publicity for the people who are pictured in the images, and violation of international treaties, all sorts of issues. This is why orphan works is a concern. It's a legitimate need. We have to address it. We all have to face that it needs to be addressed, and that some use of orphan works needs to be allowed. but it has to be fair both to the user and to the rights holder.
So what you're talking about sounds completely understandable for somebody who is a professional photographer or a professional content creator. But how does this? Let's turn back to Michael. Ask, how does this affect the average web user?
Well, let's have a focus on the web users which are using photos in some way. Well, first I want to emphasize the first word of our company name, International Press Telecommunications Council. So we have to be aware that photo is really an international market of assets, and that means that you have a view all around the globe on this issue. And I think an important facet of this is that the orphan work legislation exists only in a few countries as a law. And so that means usually people who are dealing with photos, so either as professionals or maybe only as amateurs, they know their local laws. So they are acquainted with them and they are able to accommodate to the rules of the law. But the local laws might be slightly different. And one essential, let's say, change of the rights metaphor of copyright laws is that the orphanworks now allows if somebody who owns the image cannot be found. Many laws say to use a photo it is required that you get permission, and without having a permission you are not allowed to use the photo. So actually this is a big step beyond this limitation, and suddenly you can use it if the metadata, if the owner cannot be found by the metadata or any other indicator who is the owner of the photo.
And as Jeff pointed out, it's if you don't want to find somebody, it's very easy to not find them. So this is a concern there.
Yes, yeah, of course. This is also one of the very threatening facets of this law.
Okay. So is there a solution? Let's turn back to Jeff for a moment. Is there or more than one solution for this?
I think that there is no one solution. I think that we'll see quite a number of solutions come up. It's actually a much larger market problem. It's not just OrphanWorks. OrphanWorks is a legislation. It's just a symptom of a greater problem of persistent attribution. You have to have the ability to have a robust link between the rights information and the work, so that wherever the work is, you can determine where it came from, who the creator was, who the owner was, who do you contact to make use of the work, what rights, what usages are allowed or not allowed, so that people can actually make an informed decision, because most people want to do the right thing. And so you're never going to be able to stop somebody from using an image without permission. If they intend to use that image without permission, they're going to do so. You can't stop that problem. Of course, there are legal solutions, but it's just that the problem's overwhelming. And so really what has to happen is a global solution, because this is a global problem, to mate or persistently link images to rights holders and rights information. And the PLUS Coalition, the organization that I co-founded and I'm the president of, is a nonprofit that is attempting to do just that. We knew that it was a global issue, so it's not from any one country. We've actually got 96 countries involved at this point. It can't be just the rights holders, or the users won't use it. So our organization is a coalition of the photographers, the illustrators, the stock agencies, the ad agencies, the magazine publishers, newspaper publishers, book publishers, educational institutions, libraries, etc. Everybody who's involved in creating, distributing, using, or preserving images, working together to have a solution, just one simple goal, which is to simplify and facilitate the communication of image rights. And the technology for images, for creating images, advanced at a very fast pace in recent years, but the technology for identifying images is still back, in the 60s, and we're very far behind the rest of the world in the image industries in terms of identifying our product. In other industries, in the book industry, you see the ISBN. On every product you see in almost every store, there's a universal product code. But for photographs, there's no universal way to identify them. And photographs are created by numerous means now, both with a camera, both directly in using digital software without the use of a camera, maybe combining multiple images, Photographs are created by multiple creators now, so you have this issue of you can't really use a camera ID for all instances. You have to come up with a universal identifier, and that's what Plus has done. And as well, we've created a registry at plusregistry.org, P-L-U-S, registry.org, where anybody can create a free listing that identifies their contact information so that somebody can search for them by name. But the organization, the various industries involved determined that there had to be at least one nonprofit organization that was owned and controlled by its users in all industries, and that's what the Plus Coalition is. There will be other commercial registries that pop up, and those, when linked together, are really the answer. A network of registries linked together so that a search of one registry will search all registries. It would be an impossible situation for rights holders to have to register in every country and in every registry coming out of every country, potentially hundreds of thousands of registries. There's just no possibility of that. Because somebody who wants to satisfy a diligent search requirement might just search in the registries that are least likely to result in finding the rights holder. But in general, as I said, people want to do the right thing. So if we can create a registry system, a registry network that will link together all the registries, I think you'll find your answer there. So that if somebody has an image that happens to have an ID in it, you can search by the ID and find the party that actually distributed that image. If there's no ID in the image because it's been stripped, or let's say it was distributed before IDs existed for images, then you should be able to do an image recognition search against the registry to be able to find all of the information submitted by all parties everywhere about that image. And that's exactly what the Plus registry does. We have an ID search. If there's no ID, you can do an image recognition search. That's powered by PicScout technology. And when you do an image recognition search, you could literally take a photograph of a billboard and want to know who the photographer or photographers were or illustrators were that created the images on that billboard, and it'll tell you who created and what their contact information is, assuming that they registered their work. Now, it's true that we should not have to register our work. It is a burden. Legally, we should not have to register our work. It violates the Berne Convention. It is a burden on the rights holders. But the reality is that in the current marketplace and with current technologies and the way that communication happens today and tomorrow, we have a responsibility to do so. Not a legal responsibility, but again, a professional responsibility. That's what the Plus Coalition does, and I think registries are key, as well as the rights holders taking responsibility for their work, for identifying themselves and realizing that they do have that responsibility. Also realizing that it's not enough to merely identify yourself and expect that everybody's just going to call you to get permission to use your work. You need to enable machines to be able to read your rights information and act on that rights information so that companies that are managing huge quantities of work can automatically manage them, not overuse them, be able to automatically license them, etc. And that's all part of what the Plus Coalition is doing. We're not offering licenses to work. We are providing the information necessary for unattended machines and humans to deal with this problem.
Okay. All right. So before we're going to get into the Q&A session. Just to wrap up for people that are watching, here are some things that you can do to help sort this situation out. If you're a content creator, embed metadata into your works and support compliant social sites and services. If you're reading the IPTC report, you can get an idea of at least the current status of that right now. Ask sites that you work with and services to preserve embedded metadata. As we've heard from our panelists today, often it was just a case of not understanding that they should be doing this in order to get them to do this. And of course, use social media and other channels to inform other people about why this is an issue and what they can do. If you are a content publisher, find out, first of all, if your site honors embedded metadata now. So it's important to really understand to what extent you do honor this right now. Update what you need or get it scheduled with your engineering people and publish your status. Make it known to people publicly what you are embedding or what you are not embedding and why you've chosen to do that. This is really taking the honesty approach on that. And finally, respect copyright and do not disturb embedded metadata. Okay.
Hey, David?
Yeah, sure.
If I can interject one thing, written and put up a blog post on the Dam Coalition site last night that links to another longer article that kind of goes into a lot more detail about each of the bullet points that you're making there. So if people want to take a look at that, we could either put the link up, or it's just damcoalition.com/D and then my last name, RIECKS. We can put the longer link up on the landing page if anybody wants to take a look at that.
Yeah, we'll put that link up there. Okay, before we go into the Q&A, just the short commercial about the hosts of this webinar, Picturepark Digital Asset Management Software. Modern design that works with the applications you use. It's available for the cloud, on-site, and in hybrid configurations, and the company's got better than 99% customer retention and more than 25% revenue growth in 2012 with offices in Switzerland, USA, Austria, and India. Okay, so we're going to open it up for question and answers right now. We've got a ton of questions that are coming in right there, so we'll get right into this. The first one comes from Rolf, and he's asking, what is the minimum metadata to include to be safe? So I guess in order to define copyright clearly or ownership, what would you recommend?
Well, the absolute minimum, I think, if once the registry is up and running, that may be sufficient. But in the interim, I would say, provided that you have a functioning website, having your URL in either the source or one of the other rights-related fields is a good start. There's in the full IPTC core, there's a full set of what are called creator contact info, which, I mean, goes into, it's like a V card where you've got, name, address, phone number, email addresses, website addresses, all that kind of stuff, where you can add all of that. But, if you're going to move or your phone number changes, most people, if they have a commercial business, they're going to maintain their URL for their website, and that's a good place to start.
Okay. Ian is asking, what is the difference between digital rights and copyright? Who wants to take that one?
That sounds more like a Jeff question.
Sure. Well, digital works are just one kind of work that are protected by copyright. So I don't really think that there is a difference when a copyright owner is assigning rights to an image user so that the image user can make use of the work. On occasion, they'll assign print-only rights, or they might include electronic rights or digital rights, and then specify exactly what kind of rights those are. For example, it can be used on the web, only at this URL, or only on internal pages of a certain website, etc. But certainly there are different considerations when defining digital rights because of the nature of digital use. But it's just part of the broad spectrum covered by copyright. Okay.
And from Gordon, we have, if someone has a print of one of your photographs and there are no details on the back, probably made from a new scan or digital file with the metadata removed, how do you prove you are the copyright owner?
I could take that. In general, when you see infringements happening, it's not a matter of proving you're the copyright owner. It's usually the matter of the unauthorized use of a work. And there are certain types of use that are possible just by purchasing a print. If you legally purchase a print, there's something here in the U.S. called the first sale doctrine, and there's the equivalent in other countries, which you can display that print without the permission of the copyright owner. You just can't duplicate it or use it for another reason that would violate copyright law. But in terms of being able to identify the copyright owner, that is one of the challenges. Is, let's say you have a folder filled with tear sheets or prints that you've collected, and you're an art director, and it's labeled great photos, and you have an ad campaign come up. You go to your folder, you pull out an old tear sheet. You don't know what magazine you got that from, or it could be an old print, and with no identifying information. There has to be a way to resolve this, and we're resolving it by allowing you to scan that image or shoot a picture with your cell phone, and then upload it to the PLUS registry, and it will identify the rights holder. Now, we're in beta mode right now. We're accepting registrations of rights holders and others. We'll soon begin accepting image registrations. We're currently testing our image registration search functions. And once we're populated, you'll be able to search using that print against the PLUS registry, and we will report back who the parties are that have registered that work.
Okay.
Another good thing to check as well is there's a service called TinEye that's run by eDay, TINEYE.com, that has a image recognition function as well as actually just the Google image search. When you get to the search bar, there's a little thing that looks like a camera down at one end. If you click on that, you can actually upload an image, and it will basically what it does is it shows you where that image may appear on the web. Of course, the problem there is that, you know, if 20 other people have uploaded that image to put on their, you know, Tumblr page, Facebook, whatever like that, that they may not be the owners either. But it may lead you down a path where you can't discover who it is.
I agree with David. This is Jeff. You know, these are great tools in order to find where your image is being used or where a image is being used, but they do not find the authoritative source of information for that image. They don't lead you directly back to the copyright owner, but they can. One of the results of one of those searches can be the copyright owner. Mm-hmm. Some copyright owners don't wish to be contacted because they've hired or have a relationship with a stock agency to represent them for image licensing because they're out busy being photographers and capturing images. Right. And some photographers are not available all the time to answer calls. In fact, photographers are notoriously bad at responding to inquiries. So these are great tools to use as part of a potential diligent search.
Okay. Richard has asked, do we need to target target more the browser companies and software firms that enable image theft? That's kind of a hardline question.
Yeah, well, we should be careful about the role of the browsers. Actually, they are only managing your interaction, the interaction of a user with the system. So, as you said, the save as function is only taking a photo which is displayed in a web page and saving it to a local computer. But it can only save what is in the browser, so this image which is shown in the browser, and if this image is not delivered with metadata, also a browser cannot embed it in the download process. So I think really the action takers in this workflow are the people who are responsible for the systems, for the web CMSs, so the social network systems. They have to provide the metadata with the image. This is essential, not the browser.
In addition to the social media systems, I know one of the other things that I was checking out was some of the content management systems such as WordPress and Drupal, and they're finally getting on board now. There have been some issues in the past, and a lot of that comes down to actually the underlying architecture that you're using. There are different little programs that kind of run underneath on the server level that these CMSs take advantage of, and some of those are not designed to preserve metadata, but you can sometimes choose between one or two, and then it's a it's a point of choosing the right one. So just like choosing your social media system when you set up something, it's really essential that you test to make sure that your stuff is being retained.
With regard to browsers, it would be ideal for the browsers, the companies offering the browsers, to offer native support to recognize all the metadata that's in the file. Part of the challenge there is that there have been competing solutions put forth by various organizations, and it's kind of incumbent on those organizations to team up, just like IPTC and the PLUS Coalition have teamed up, with IPTC adopting some of the PLUS rights metadata standards and PLUS adopting the IPTC standards, so that when we do approach these browser companies, that they will be more likely to consider it. And then even beyond that, you can have an operating system level recognition of embedded metadata rather than just part of the metadata. Certainly there's some embedded metadata that you can see today by looking at the properties of the file, but much of it is hidden.
Okay, we're gonna a few more questions on this next topic, because I got to tell you guys, we're getting angry questions. People are not buying the idea that metadata, for example, is taking up too much bandwidth for download. Alan is asking along these lines, I would guess that with how few people use metadata, that Facebook and the rest would see this as a very low priority fix. Any evidence to suggest otherwise?
Well, I mean,
in response to an angry question about metadata, I would say that one of the issues would be if you're on the search engine side, and I've heard it from the search engines, if you load down a file with metadata and it's a low resolution file, you'll see a dramatic increase in the size of the file. I'm not talking about just the name, just somebody's name. I'm talking about loading it down with the kind of metadata that a museum or a newspaper or let's say a photographer who does put a lot of metadata into their files might use. Part of the answer to that is to include an ID in the file that links to remotely stored metadata that the search engine can then access and display. I don't think anybody on this call would support the elimination of metadata for any reason, but I do think that there is that perception on the part of the search engines that it does slow down their page loads, and if you test it, you'll see that in fact the metadata does increase the file size when you put quite a bit of metadata into the file.
Now, one thing I'll note here, I know in our tests of the Google Plus system, what was happening there, if I recall correctly, is if you upload an image that has a full complement of metadata, that original file, wherever it is housed back in the system, will still retain that information. As it makes derivative versions, smaller, lighter weight versions, it's keeping only a subset of the information in the files. And so, it's generally the creator and copyright notice, which are the main the main information that you would need to contact somebody. So, I mean, that's one way of dealing with it there. Yeah, they are removing some information, but it's not all.
Okay. We've got, Caroline is asking, I don't see how embedded metadata will solve the problem when anyone can strip it and then repost the image. Can you explain?
Yeah, well, actually it's right. I think the only solution is what Jeff has outlined. So if, let's say, the link to the metadata is embedded into the, let's say, the sequence of the pixels. So you would have to make an essential modification of the image to disable, to find the key which is leading to an entry in the registry. But this is one of the questions we at the IPDC are asked a lot of times. Why were you not able to stop that software takes out and strips of metadata? And we have to say, by technical means, this is actually impossible. There are almost no ways to prohibit that, and even you don't even have to strip out. If you replace it by blank bytes, the content, you wouldn't change even the size. You only take away the information. So it's quite easy to do this with a technical editor at the price of zero.
I would say that the fact that some companies currently strip out metadata is not a reason against, or an argument against the use of embedded metadata. That would defy logic. You want to put identifying information into that file. You do not want to be injecting orphans into the ether. You don't know what's coming in the future. The solutions that are coming in the future are going to rely on the information that you have placed into that file. But what you do need are layers of protection, like I've described earlier in the program. You need to put an ID into the file that refers to remotely stored metadata. Image files are an inefficient way to communicate information. Other media do it by placing an ID in the file that refers to remotely stored information. You need to then take that identifier and optionally create a steganographic mark in the image. And by steganographic, I mean an invisible watermark. So, Digimark is working with Plus on this, so that you can put the watermark into the file that has your ID. So if the ID is lost, the text ID is lost from the header, you have it embedded in the pixels. And then lastly, if both of those things are lost, that's an unlikely occurrence, but if both are lost, you can always recover some information and reestablish that link by using image recognition. Image recognition alone is not the answer. image recognition will get you back to all records for an image. The party who distributed the image and placed an ID in it deserves to be found when you search, based on the image that you're looking at and searching by. In the absence of that ID, you can't find the specific party that distributed it, but you can find all the parties who have registered it, like the creator, the owner, and all the authorized licensors.
Okay, well, the last question comes from Dawn. This is actually the last question we have time for. Unfortunately, we have about 40 other questions in this queue that we will put. I'll get answers from our panelists, and we will put them on the landing page for this webinar. So when you get the email for the link on that, you will have that information. Don's question is, could some modification of fair use satisfy libraries and cultural heritage concerns without the need to commercialize orphan works?
That's an excellent question, and I believe a viable answer to the problem. I don't know that it's acceptable. I think what happened, at least speaking about what's happened in the U.S., I think that enough negotiation was done between the rights holders and the parties who wish to be able to make use of orphan works that I think that the parties who wish to make use of orphan works have kind of regrouped and might support an exception to orphan works for certain circumstances. And that would, of course, allow something that would make the rights holders, I think, in general, quite happy or relatively happy in avoiding the commercial use and exploitation of orphan works, which is what most of the rights holders are concerned about. And I certainly don't speak on behalf of the rights holders when I say that, but it's just my understanding from my relationships with the rights holder groups.
I can say from talking to other photographers that something like that I think would be more acceptable than some of the legislation that was being talked about in 2008 in the U.S. I guess the big sticking point, however, is fair use is something that I think is more unique to the U.S. I don't think that there is comparable fair use within Britain and most parts of Europe. Michael can probably address that.
Well, they do have fair dealing in the UK, and it's quite similar to fair use. It's not identical. And the issue with fair use is that people don't understand it and think, well, the way I'm using it is fair, and that's not what fair use is. Fair use is the satisfaction of a number of criteria that are established in statutes, and really only a judge can make the determination as to whether or not a use is fair. The fact that an image is really tiny or has credit on it does not make it.
Or you're only using so many words out of an excerpt from a book. Yeah, there's lots of kind of old wives' tales about that, but not much is supported in case law.
And fair use is not a bad thing. It's a necessary element of copyright law. It's a necessary exemption so that you can make fun of works, so that you can criticize works, so that you can research works, etc. But we have to be very careful when cracking open fair use. It's going to happen anyway, though.
Okay, that's all we've got time for. As I said, we'll get the other questions that have come in. We'll try to get answers from our panelists from that and put it on the landing page for this, which you will be able to view at picturepark.com/copyright. Thanks very much, David, Jeff, Michael. I know you put a lot of time into this webinar, and I really, really appreciate that. And thank you very much for everybody who's attended. And we hope to see you all at the next Picturepark webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.